Welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club. We are a monthly gathering of both skeptics and Christian believers, respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. We've been doing this this is our sixth year of having the book club. We usually alternate between a Christian book and an atheist book. We're not going to do that this week. This month. This is a special edition. But my name is James Walker. I'm president of Watchman Fellowship. I'm one of the two co-founders of the club. I am a Christian apologist, working with Watchman Fellowship, a nonprofit focusing on interfaith evangelism. And we do research, we write books, do podcasts, and other ways of getting the word out. Basically, interacting with and having relationships with those who are not Christians. So we interact with world religions like Islam and Buddhism, Hinduism, what we would call new religious movements like Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormonism, Unification Church, Shinjanji, other religions. We also deal in the area of the occult, witchcraft. We've even done some work and research in the area of Satanism, as well as we're interested in atheism and agnosticism, and thus the book club. This is something that we do in partnership with our atheist friends and our other co-founder that I'll introduce in just a moment, Bill Kluck. Now, looking in, we have a pretty good room full right now. Most of our participants actually come in after the book club and on YouTube, and that's where we get most of our viewers from. But we've got a pretty good room right now, and I'm noticing some of our actually guest authors in with us that from previous months, previous years in some cases. Let me just take a few minutes of just scroll through here and introduce some of the ones that I want to. We have Kelly is with us, who is also known as Godless Granny, YouTube channel Godless Granny. Kelly, welcome back to the book club. Let's see, we also have, I think, is Richard Suttles. Did I see him earlier? Yeah, is he in there? Okay, I think he's planning to be here. I'm not seeing him in the room right now. He is the atheist, and he's been one of our guest speakers before on the atheist side of things. We also, did somebody see John Loftus in here earlier?
Yeah,
Oh, I
John's
see
there.
him. Hey, John, welcome back to the Atheist. He's a multi-time, both by Zoom and in person in Arlington, Texas, been a guest with us all the way from, where are you from, John? Unmute and tell us.
Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Fort Wayne, Indiana. Fort Wayne, Indiana. And he's the author of God and Horrendous Suffering and many other anthologies and books. What have we done? Three of your books now, or at least parts of three of your books, I think. Yeah. So I know Bill appreciates you being here, John.
Oh my gosh, he has had a profound impact on my faith. I mean, his book, The Christian Delusion, just really, blew me away. And even Christian authors say, you got to read this guy. Forget Dawkins and all these other guys. You go to John Loftus books if you really want to know, Christianity.
On the Christian side, one of our a longtime member, recent guest author, Phil Bear's with us. He wrote the book Machines Don't Laugh. We looked at that a couple of months ago from the Christian perspective. And I got a text from Travis Dickinson. You remember him, don't you, Bill? Travis?
Yeah, he recommended me for a debate, that I had, Is Christianity True?
Yeah. So he's co-author of the book Stand Firm, Apologetics and the Brilliance of the Gospel. He's a professor here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at Dallas Baptist University, and he's planning to be here as well. And then we're missing a couple of people that wanted to be here. Ken Daniels,
he just jumped in.
Family. Ken is in with us for a minute. Well, Ken, I'm going to let you jump ahead because I know you're tied up right now. So it says that your internet is unstable too. I don't know what that means, but anyway, Ken has got family obligations, but he really wanted to be here. He did prepare like a 4-minute video that he wanted to say something to you. We're going to watch that later, but if he's in with us, we can just bring him on in a few minutes live to talk if he'd like to do that. So, And then it looks like we have a lot of some names I'm not recognizing. If you guys would do me a favor, if this is your first time to be at the Atheist and Christian Book Club, if you'll just text in where Daniel will be able to see, just say, I'm new, just do that. And we can keep up with a lot of new faces and names in that. So good group here to talk with our other co-founder. And let me give you the background and set this up a little bit. Bill has been my friend, and I'll call him a good friend. Bill has been my friend, came to see me speak at a church. He was kind of the unofficial, what would you call it?
Evangelist.
Evangelist for the Metroplex Atheists. And so he came to a church, and he thought I was a pastor because I was preaching there at Cottonwood. And it was, but I was just a guest preacher. But anyway, we got to meet there. He came to my office and met with me after that and brought me down the street about a half a block to Jay Gilligan's Bar and Grill to meet up with the weekly meetup of the Metroplex Atheists. And I got to meet um, probably several dozen of the mainstay atheists that attend that. Randy Word, who was president of that time of the organization, got to be friends for about a year. We met, but out of that 1 year meeting at the Metroplex Atheist Weekly Fellowship, Bill and I started talking the idea about having a way of meeting regularly with the outside of the Metroplex Atheist. And so basically the book club was launched. We're in our 6th year now of doing the book club. And Bill has always had an ability that I call it to play devil's advocate, especially when he sees that we Christians are not doing a really good job of defending our faith. He'll step in and help us, and he will take the role of atheist. And
hey, I did on the Godless Engineer. I called in and defended the faith that Jesus was historical, which was really funny. So we had a really good talk.
He'll play the.
Be on Godless Granny's channel or whatever, and have a little try to get Jesus placed in history.
Well, he'll take our position, and I think on both sides, Christian and atheist side, it's a sign that you really understand the issue if you can understand the argument from both directions. Right. And so, I hear Bill's voice in my head sometimes when a Christian asks me a question. I'm thinking, well, I know how Bill would answer that question, but how am I going to answer this question? So Bill would step in, and he's always done that. And every once in a while, Bill will confide with me that there was something that kind of one of the Christian books, that one fact was a little bit bothersome to him and stuff like that. But sometimes I get my hopes up a little bit. But then 2 or 3 weeks later, it's the same old Bill. He's right back to being that dedicated, devoted atheist. But 2024 has been different. And we had a book last year that seemed to really affect Bill, A Fortunate Universe. It's co-authored by both a Christian cosmologist and an atheist cosmologist, both in Australia. And it is a very powerful book. And Bill, this has not been a 2 week thing or something like that. I mean, my understanding, and Bill can correct me, but it seems like all of 2024, this has been on his mind. And so he's been rereading the book over and over again. And so we arranged to have a private Zoom meeting for about an hour, connecting in Australia, Bill and Luke Barnes, the cosmologist. And Bill wanted to ask him questions and kind of get out of the way of what it was he understanding, or follow-up questions on what's in the book. So bottom line is this has shook him up. And the way Bill describes it, he says he's having an existential crisis of faith, or in his case, maybe it would be lack of faith. But the bottom line is, I would love nothing better, and I've privately told Bill this is no secret. I would love to see Bill become a Christian again. He used to profess Christianity. I'd love to see that. I'm sure he would love to see me be an atheist, but I don't want him to make a decision like this for faulty reasons or wrong reasons. I want it to be looking at the best possible evidence on both sides. My job is to present the Christian evidence, but I want him to have the best possible atheist answers and then come to that conclusion. So he asked for this special book club. We're not doing a book this time. Some of you watched, we released, with both of their permission, we released the private video on our Friends of the Atheist and Christian Book Club Facebook group. And some of you have watched that or watched part of that. We had a watch party at my house maybe about 2 weeks ago, and we sat down and watched it together. And so what I wanted to do is all of you that are there, and especially some of the atheist friends that made special efforts to be here, thank you. And I want you to be able to give advice or ask questions of Bill or the Christians here. You can do that as well, but especially I want the atheists to be able to do that. And then we have a couple of videos lined up if we get time to go to those to talk about those as well. But what I want to do is take a few minutes first to interview you, Bill, and kind of so that everybody can kind of find out exactly where you are, what's changed in the last 2 weeks with you maybe, or, kind of bring us up to speed. And if you have a question for Bill, give me 10 minutes or so to do an interview with him. But you can go ahead right now if you have a question or want to make a comment that you want Bill to hear. 2 ways to do it. Either way, I want you to put it in a text so that Daniel Ray, he's our moderator, he can know that you have the question, he can get it all ready to go, and then he'll call on you to unmute your mic and ask the question. Or a lot of people don't like to go on camera and do it, which is fine. You can simply say, would you ask this question for me? Or would you make this statement for me? And then Daniel Ray would be more than happy to say, hey, we've got somebody asking you this question, and he'll just ask it for you. So we're going to do that.
You can ask me to use an accent if you have a question.
A what?
An accent. I will try. If you have a favorite accent, I will try it.
So you can even say what nationality you'd like to be.
A British accent.
Speaking from a West African accent, would you?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right. Well, you know the joke that the people from Australia, because that's where Luke is. He's in Sydney. People from Australia are just Texans with a British accent. That's what they.
Well,
I heard that.
I'm not very good at deciphering the accents, much less creating them myself. But Bill, let me go ahead and get you a couple of questions to get us going here. So has it been all of 2024 that this has been on your mind, weighing on your heart?
Yeah, well, we read the book of Fortunate Universe, but I would just be sitting in the car while Teresa was doing in a store. So I really read the book, and it kind of blew me away, to be honest with you.
So it deals with the fine tuning. Now, a lot of us are very familiar. Some of us were in that club, but we know exactly how that conversation went. But there's some new people here. There's their first time. Could you just summarize what is the fine tuning argument for God?
Well, let me read a part of the book. When I was sitting in the parking lot, playing with the laws of physics, it turns out, can be catastrophic for life. Often the catastrophe is boredom. The periodic table disappears, and all the astonishing beauty and unity of chemistry desert us. The galaxies, stars, and planets that host and energize life are replaced by lethal black holes or just thin hydrogen soup. So I looked at that and I went, oh, that's interesting that Luke said that. And then I thought, oh my gosh, Gerate said that. The atheist admitted to that. So
that's the atheist co-author. So the Christian
admitted to a lot of this fine-tuning, that the initial constants of the universe have to be just right, or this thing might not work in the way that we have a life prohibiting or life permitting universe.
Yes, and so there are parameters that don't, at least on the surface, seem to be necessary. And in fact, Sean Carroll, the atheist cosmologist, points out that it actually, in some cases, is not what you would ever have guessed it would be. But come to find out, this parameter is not predictable. But the parameter, come to find out, would be essential either to have a life supporting universe, or even to have stars and atoms at all.
Well, he was talking about the cosmological constant fine-tuned to 10 to the 120th. And when an atheist admits this precision and fine tuning. I know Hugh Ross says if you have the mass density of the universe just a little bit off, this thing just falls apart. He compares it to a flake on a battleship. So when that happens, then I take notice. I mean, obviously, I don't trust much of what Christians say because they have a little hyperbolic sort of thing.
So,
Yes.
James, you were talking about, we just had a question. Kelly, did you want to ask it?
Oh, by the way, Kelly asked me, which is really brilliant of her if she got this on her own. She said, carbon is an amazing thing for a life permitting universe because it can interact with so many things. She said, well, how about silicon? Could that be? And that's really interesting you mentioned that, Kelly, because that's what some of the great physicists say is if we were in a silicon permitting universe, we'd say how great silicon is. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was one of the two main objections. The other one being, is it even possible for the parameters to be different? I don't think we can know that it's even possible. I gave James a short clip of Alex O'Connor addressing this question and talking about how Einstein discovered that it isn't possible for the parameters of gravity to be different, because what he discovered was that gravity, that space and time are interlinked. And because of that, gravity has to be the way that it is. I don't understand all of the science, which is why I gave him the clip. But that's the other question. So the first question is, if the parameters were different, could life exist that is different than life as we know it? And the second is, could the parameters even be different?
And gravitational constant is one of the great constants in nature. It's fine-tuned to 10 to the 40th. And Christians will put this out to try to blow you away. So, let's get to the bottom of it, right?
Well, let's address that first one for carbon-based life. But if it wasn't carbon, then could it just be a different element, maybe silicon-based life or something?
Yeah, because it's right below carbon on the periodic table.
My understanding is
Silica 14.
I think what happened, I think this was discussed in that Zoom meeting, if I remember correctly. I know that it's been dealt with by Luke Barnes, but I'm not sure if it was in that Zoom meeting or not. I think it was. But anyway, if any of those parameters are off minutely, it's not that you lose just carbon, you lose the entire periodic table. And so you might be able to survive, you might be able to get hydrogen and perhaps helium. That's atomic number 1 and atomic number 2. But anything heavier than that would be impossible if any of those parameters are tweaked just about at all. So you don't get a third generation star, you don't get stars. If the expansion rate is different, you don't even get stars. If you don't have stars, you can't have planets. And so I think it's an issue of losing just about, if not the entire periodic table, if you do that. Now, Daniel, you remember, was that in the Zoom meeting that was discussed?
It came up. Luke said that, as you said, James, that there are a dozen or so what they call parameters, free parameters. And these are numbers that just, for lack of a better word, they just fall out of the sky because physicists can't predict how to get them. But you need, if you're going to be a universe builder like Luke, he builds universes on computers, you need these numbers. And then, so what he does, and where his thesis and brilliance lies, is he takes and plays with the free parameters to see what the supercomputers spit out. And his whole book, A Fortunate Universe, is about his supercomputer calculations that have dialed down to a very narrow window of carbon-based life permitting, a carbon-based life permitting universe. So yeah, the free parameters, the physicists can't, they can't do any kind of calculation to get these numbers. They can't make sense of them in terms of where they come from or why they're there. Bill's favorite mysterious number is 1/137, right? The fine structure constant.
That's
That's
which
right.
Daniel turned me on to.
what's fascinating about the fine structure constant is that in silica, which is a 14, the atomic weight of 14, so it has 14 14 electrons and 14 neutrons in the well, it has 14 electrons on the outside and 14 protons in the nucleus. And there's 3 concentric shells. If you want to look at the Niels Bohr model of the atom, there's 2. There's 4 electrons on the first level. There's 8 on the second ring. No, there's 2 there's 2. I forgot. Anyway, there's 3 separate rings, and they all have a different amount of electrons in them. And each of those 3 rings is separated even more so by that number, that the fine structure constant. So you need that energy level of the fine structure constant. It's the space. It has something to do with the calculations between the space of the energy levels of the electrons that orbit the nucleus of the proton. So even if you have a universe with silicon-based life, you still have this amazing structure of silica, which requires the fine structure constant to give silica its binding properties. It's got 4 valent electrons on the outside, and if it didn't have those 4, you're not binding to anything.
Right. And here's the thing with the fine structure constant. If it's off by like 4%, you don't get helium and beryllium in stars.
You don't get the basic stuff.
Yeah, to get carbon. So right off the get-go, you've got to have this thing pretty good to get carbon. And if this thing's off the fine structure constant.
And Luke was telling, in our conversation, Luke was talking about taking these free parameters and just tweaking a few of them. We're not talking maybe 1 or 2.
Now, I think you said also if you tweak the other direction, you could get a universe that was nothing but iron.
Solid iron universes.
Solid iron universe. But to have the diversity, any diversity whatsoever in the periodic table, you'd have to have the parameters almost exactly as they are.
Mm-hmm. And he said,
Kelly, do you find this compelling?
No.
Okay.
Partly because, okay, so you don't get this element, so you don't get that element. Maybe you end up with a universe that's completely of a substance unknown to us entirely. Maybe it doesn't have elements. Maybe it's based on something else entirely. But even if that is not the case, even if you have to have the parameters be what they are, do we even know that it's possible to not have these parameters? That's the other question.
Well, I think that the fine tuning, the way the fine tuning argument works, is it's not postulating what is possible, but trying to answer the question of what is. How do we deal with what is? How do we explain what is? So contingencies about what might be are part of what goes into making multiverses, but the universes that Luke does. But
Grant Lewis is the co-author of Luke's book, Fortunate Universe. And so it had been a while since I read it. So, we asked Luke again during this Zoom meeting we had a couple of months ago with Luke. And he says the way Geraint deals with it, his atheist co-author, they agree on all the science. They agree on all the 10 to the whatever, the improbability of it, they all agree. And the way he kind of gets around it is a multiverse solution. In other words, if it's a 1 billion to 1 odds that all these parameters would be exactly right to permit a periodic table that would allow for life of any kind, if you have 1 billion universes, you've solved that math problem. We just happen to be in the one that had them all right. But you could postulate, okay, what if every universe had a different set of parameters? You have an iron universe out there. You have a universe of only hydrogen or hydrogen and helium. And so, but if you have enough universes and enough randomness, enough time, chronos and chaos, you put those 2 things together, you end up with at least one universe, ours, that works. And so, again, most of the cosmologists, atheists that we've talked to don't seem to be big fans of multiverse. We had a guest author who wrote the book A Universe from Nothing, Lawrence Krauss. And he is famously not a big fan of multiverse. But a multiverse would be a possible answer. One of the issues that comes out of that problem is apparently if you have billions of universes and some kind of mechanism for generating universes constantly, then it would appear that you must have a finely tuned universe creating machine going somewhere. And so how do we have that machine cranking out universes left and right? It would seem to be almost more of a long shot than just having one universe, that you have to have this happening millions of times.
And the possibility and the problem with the problem, and Luke said this too, I remember the problem with infinite. Sometimes people speculate about infinite multiverses. But if infinite multiverses are possible, then everything is possible, including a multiverse where the multiverse doesn't exist. So you get into the problem of infinities and it doesn't solve anything really. So what's happening in order to explain the fine tuning, the 13 free parameters that we have and all the other things that they combine to create is that physicists and cosmologists are invoking invisible entities that cannot be empirically demonstrated, whether they be hypothetical universes or multiverses or many worlds like Hugh Everett in the 1940s and 50s. The entities to explain this world do not come from things that we can see. So ultimately, I think cutting edge cosmology and physics has a lot with.
Well, it's problematic, but there is some math to point that direction. Didn't you have another question too, Kelly?
I'm wondering at what point did these properties come to be? Did they exist at the beginning of time? Did they develop at a point, a nanosecond after time began?
Well, you have the expansion rate of the universe, which does, from the singularity, you have the inflation where the universe doubles 80 times in the first second, just an amazing thing. But if that expansion rate is too fast, you don't get galaxies formed. If it's too slow, then it just collapses into a black hole. So right from the get-go, one of these constants has to be, the cosmological constant has to be just right.
Neil, you had your hand up. Sorry to keep you waiting so long, sir. Do you want to ask Bill something?
Yeah, that's all right. I just want to make a couple quick comments on some of the discussion here. For what it's worth, the rate or force of gravity and the speed of light do change. And there's measurements going back to the 40s on the fact that they change. They don't change a lot, but they do change. And it's by convention. There's an organization in England that actually sets the G gravitational number, but it does change. And of course, nobody knows why and nobody investigates it because it's inconvenient. That doesn't respond to all the other element issues you guys have talked about, but I just throw that out there as an interesting fact that, again, just kind of flies by. I thought
the speed of light was one of the great constants of nature, but,
it changes. It actually changes.
Well, and to that point, too, and Einstein, when he came out with his 1905 paper, let's say, Neil, you and I are on Mars, and I'm going to text you a message at noon. I tell you I'm going to text it to you at noon. You get it at 12:10. You text it back to me. I receive it at 12:20. Einstein assumed that round trip of the text message, of the impulse of light there, was the same in both directions. 10 minutes to you and 10 minutes back to me. But what that 1905 paper conceded was that was a convention. And he said it's entirely possible that you get the text instantaneously and it takes 20 minutes to get back to me, or you get the text in 20 minutes and it instantaneously comes back to me from Mars. And that's what Einstein said. Now, it doesn't make the speed of light wrong. He's just said it's a convention. So when someone tells you, actually, this is the implication. If someone tells you that the light from a distant star is it takes so many light years to get to us, that's possible. But the convention is that the speed of light is the same in both directions, and we don't have a way, because of the way light is measured, we don't have a way to measure that or prove that convention to be the same. So it's theoretically possible that the stars
it's scientific. It's been scientifically measured. Both gravity and the speed of light change. They're not always the same. So, but that's not a big point. The other thing I wanted to get to just a quick comment on the multiverse and then ask Bill this question. There's two problems with multiverse. Of course, I think, like you mentioned, first of all, it's unscientific because you can't prove a damn thing about it. The second problem is a mathematical, a statistical problem. It's a probability. If you formulate that there are a bunch of universes that could probably turn into this planet system or this universe system or whatever, what you're stipulating is that there is a relationship, that there is a probability relationship to these universes. If they were totally independent, again, it's a nonsensical situation. You couldn't even begin to make that claim. So the fact that you're postulating that there is a probability mathematical relationship among these billions of universes means that when you consider the billions of universes and all the permutations that would be required to create multiple universes, it fails the test of even rational possibility. So mathematically, it's a ridiculous thing as well.
Well, it has its problems, yeah.
I just point that out because nobody considers the probability mathematics of this multi-universe thing. The question I really want to ask you, Bill, is about James Tabor. And I'm wondering, are you familiar with some of James Tabor's videos on the Bible, critical Bible analysis, etc.?
Yeah, sure.
What's your thoughts about some of what he proposes?
He's interesting, So,
Okay. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Let me do this. I want to. Kelly suggested a video, and I've got that we can play in a little bit. And I don't want to forget to circle back to the video from the Cosmic Skeptic and play that little 3.5-minute video. But before I do that, since we got a good conversation flow going right now, I'd like to take a couple of more questions or comments, either for Bill. So do we have anybody? I'm not able to follow the text very closely with everything.
Joel has a question. Joel and John. Joel and then John.
Okay, Joel first. Joel, could you unmute
and then John will have John Loftus will go next.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you, Joel.
Okay. So I have several thoughts and questions, I guess, but the first one I'll knock out of the park, Bill, is your doubt, your crisis of faith about this number 1/137 or 10 times whatever, like these quote unquote fingerprints of God. Is that leading you to the Christian God, the Jewish God, or is it just like an intelligent designer, a creator? I think the Feynman quote in that YouTube video mentioned like these are the pen strokes of God or something to that effect.
Yeah,
so
he
like,
said every physicist should put this number up 1 to the 137th and worry about it. So if they're worried, I certainly should be worried. But it's not only that, it's the origin of life. I've been looking at James Tour and Professor Dave go back and forth, and James Tour says some things about the origin of life, like it has to, they get chemicals from the shelf that weren't available in early life, that you sometimes have too many chemicals that gum up the process, that there's just severe problems with the origin of life. So both the origin of the universe and origin of life and these constant natures do impact whether there is a God behind this thing. Does that make sense?
But I understand that. And
the Christian God right now, I'm just looking at, does this point to God right now? So I haven't even gotten to that.
Yeah. Okay.
So are you doing just to follow up on Joel's question? Are you first of all trying to resolve the question, is there a God of any kind, and then try to answer what kind? Is it a Christian or Jewish or what? Okay.
Of course. Hey, and
did that help you, Joel?
Yeah, it does. I guess the only thing I would add to that is my own perspective, or maybe at a certain point I will take Bill's approach to this, but right now my response whenever I see 1/137 or some other coincidence like that is, okay, there's more to be discovered here. Not necessarily implying that there's an entity behind the scenes pulling the strings, but that's just my intuition, and maybe it's just different sense of intuition. But
we can go brute fact. That's what typically we go as atheists. We just go brute fact. But anyway, I want to talk about John Loftus, who's had a huge impact on my life. If you want to learn about Christianity, you need to read his books. What's your latest book, John?
Well, God and Horrendous Suffering.
I still haven't read that thing on Calvinism. What's that chapter called?
Well, I basically take the side of the Arminianist against the Calvinist.
You think so?
Well, because Calvinists seem to be dominating the web. At least it seems like it is anyway. So, and I think they're pretty offensive. So,
John, would it be fair to say that you're not a Christian anymore, but you're still an Arminian?
No, it wouldn't be fair to say that at all. Hey, I just want to know, Bill. I'm not a scientist, and I can't speak to the science. I do know that the odds of us having this conversation. It looks like there's about 20 people here involved in this video presentation. The odds of us here, dressed as we are, wearing glasses or not glasses, having beards or not beards, if you got a haircut recently, whether you got a haircut, what you're wearing, the very words that I am speaking right now in the precise order that I am speaking them. If someone were to predict this, that's all of this, and all the conversation that took place up until now, every word of it, and where we're located, what towns we're at. Right now, I'm in Michigan. I'm traveling around, and that's unexpected. I never expected that, but I am here. I'm enjoying life. But for all of that to take place is astronomically impossible from the perspective of a year ago. Some of us could have died before then. It's even doubly, if I could say, doubly astronomically impossible from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago, from 30. And can you imagine someone trying to predict us speaking what we're speaking, say 1,000 years ago, given the science of the day?
You're not the only one that's thought of this. James,
I didn't say I was.
Okay. James Tour said that the probability to get amino acids first to be homochiral is really unlikely because they have to be left-handed. To get those lined up and hooked right together to make a protein, Stephen Meyer said the same thing, is like 10 to the 77. Well, that's just like impossible. But what Professor Dave said was something similar to you. He said, imagine 10 people in a room. What's the likelihood that you would have all these birthdays be what they are? So yeah, you have improbabilities all over the place.
I would say a big difference to that. A big difference, though, is we could have this Zoom meeting even if Bill was wearing glasses and you were in Florida rather than Indiana or whatever. So the variables, yes, you're right. They'd be almost astronomically impossible to predict, to guess ahead of time. But they're not necessary. In other words, we still have the Zoom meeting without them, or with all the variables being different. But the parameters of the fine-tuning construct is basically you can only get a life-permitting universe if all these parameters happen to be like they are. So change one, and there's nobody here to ask the question anymore.
But then you're presupposing that these events right now, today, what we're talking and who we are and where we are, you're presupposing that was an inevitable, and you're judging the chance events as if they all inexorably lead up to this event right now, when it wouldn't have taken anything for it not to have happened the way it is happening now. If chance had been something different, if say Bill, if your parents got an abortion on you or not, that would make a big difference on whether the events happened. You're basically looking at what is today and saying that this is what had to happen. But chance says otherwise, and to judge it from what has happened is merely doing what we're doing right here, saying this had to happen and that did not have to happen the way it is. Unless you're a determinist, but then it leaves out God too.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
James, Ron had a question. Ron, do you want me to read it or you want to ask him? Your mic, you're muted there, Ron. You can ask him. Just unmute yourself.
Ron.
It was
There you
hidden temporarily.
Hey,
Hey, Bill, good to see you.
Hey, nice to see you.
Greetings from Living Free in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And my question is, I wonder if you've considered whether the problem of fine tuning is more compelling than what we know about the incredibly complex intelligent information that's in DNA. In other words, the information problem, is that kind of interconnected with the fine tuning problem in your view?
Yeah, it's two of the problems is how do you get nucleic acids, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleotides? How do you get these four basic things for life to come about? And I know you have the RNA, hypothesis and the vents and the wet dry cycling that you can have autocatalysis where you can start to get these polypeptides and stuff occur naturally. But it still seems to be just like with the universe, you have to have the mass of the electron just right. You have to have the ratio of the proton to the electron just right. How in the world do you get all those things to be just right? And it's the same with origin of life, that you've got to have a lipid layer to enclose these cells that has an inside and outside, then lets things in and so forth. That's not an easy thing to get these things, to get a carbohydrate. So I know the origin of life people have answers to this and they have pathways, but we're still a long way from, forget DNA, just forgetting RNA, pathway to the origin of life.
And then there's the concept that's kind of a meta concept, Bill, of, and we've talked about this before, that why is any of this what we would call the concept of intelligibility? How is it that we can even know these things to the detail that we do? That's another aspect of this, but it seems that whether it's rocks or atoms or stars, that it seems like these things were who we are and where we are in the universe. The ability to see these things at all and to contemplate them is a wonder. When you
I agree with that.
Think about that. Yeah.
So, hey, Bill, just to expand just a little bit, I've just marveled at things like the seed, an individual seed of a great sequoia tree is maybe about the size of a mustard seed.
Now, it looks like an oat. It looks like a little tiny oat.
How does it know? I mean, when you think that when triggered, that seed then germinates and produces a complex plant, this massive sequoia tree, or it could be a dandelion in your yard, same thing, which is comprised of millions of cells, and every cell knows exactly what its function is to build what it has to build, and then have the ability to reproduce. The thought that it's running subroutines of DNA and other genetic phenomena in every one of those. You and I each have over 1 trillion cells. Every one is running the subroutine of DNA that it has to do its job, whether it's to make your red cells or to make the bed of your fingernail to push your fingernail out. To me, the information driving all of that is just mind-boggling.
It is, and you have, Daniel can help me with this, these things that repair and redundancy features in the cell, that why are they there? I mean, how does that just evolve by naturalistic means?
Carl Sagan did a
genetically
segment.
modified something.
So I'll close this out. To oversimplify, is there any such thing as a computer program that doesn't have an intelligent programmer?
Well, that's
back down the road.
Yeah. That it seems to,
I messed with some software that made me wonder that same question, though.
There's a great little 5-minute segment on YouTube taken from Carl Sagan's Cosmos, where he's talking about the digestion of an apple, and he's walking through a virtual library, and he's saying that the amount of information needed in the process of human digestion would fill, and then, you know, the encyclopedias of volumes. And he's like, you know, thank you. Be thankful that we don't have to consciously process the process that's going on seemingly automatically as we digest things. But it's a great little video. Carl Sagan eating an apple, YouTube.
And by the way, Ron, you have things like the Krebs cycle, the blood clotting cascade, which how in the world do you have to have prothrombin turn to thrombin, you have to have fibrin turn to, and when you cut yourself, why doesn't your whole body bleed? So all these, it's about 10 steps. So the irreducible complexity people would say, well, you can't just have one step or you're going to bleed to death. All these things have to, they can't evolve separately. They have to all be in place for this blood clotting cascade to exist.
And then, Bill, you have the genetic regulatory networks.
That's what I was.
Yeah, I know that's what you're trying to think of.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and those are the things that it looks like a circuit, like a guitar amp circuit. And there's no naturalistic explanation for how this circuitry. If you go on and you can look up, I think the most famous diagram out there is the purple sea urchins diagram of this thing, and it regulates the genetic it's a genetic regulation machine. It tells cells and helps to process cells what they should build, and one little tweak to this thing and it falls apart. And it's hard to come up with an a priori, where did this come from, step one in the evolutionary process. This thing looks like it needs to function all at once, otherwise it's not going to function. But it's the gene regulatory network. You can look it up. It's fascinatingly complex. But that was what you're talking about, Bill, right?
And I think that effectively is a question of outrageously complex computer programs made up of subroutines, and the cells in your bone marrow that, while we've been sitting here, and each of us have made millions of new red cells, that those cells know exactly what subroutine to run.
I'm not following all the texts because they're flying by.
I'm getting them. I'm getting them.
Good. So I did see that Howard Cottingham.
I don't know if he wanted to answer his question or not. Or
yeah,
he was
can
just
you
saying
find
something?
out? He has some good questions, but does he want us to ask him for him, or would he like to ask him? Or
Howard, do you want to ask him? Yeah, go ahead, Howard. Yeah.
Thank you. The discussion of the physical is very important, but I think one has to add that we have to examine the spiritual realities, and there is a great deal of evidence for spiritual reality. And the thing that I want to draw attention to is that we cannot honestly disregard the Bible as a source of a possible explanation, not just for the physical, for the spirit, but for the spiritual. And I submit that it provides an explanation, and it provides an explanation for both the origin and behavior of spirit beings, of human beings, of the universe, and that we should look to it and consider what it has to say. And the atheist often says, well, that's a matter of faith. Well, of course it is. Everyone is believing something. And looking at all of this physical evidence calls for a conclusion about whether we have the best evidence. And I submit that one should not exclude the Bible in that process as evidence that must be examined, because I suggest that it is the only place that has a solution for both. And my faith was not formed until I understood that. So that's the core of my thought.
Are you familiar with Hugh Ross?
Sorry?
Are you familiar with Hugh Ross? Reasons to Believe?
I'm familiar with Hugh Ross, and no, I've not read his books because I certainly would not agree with his viewpoint, but it is a matter of faith in the evidence. And I'm just suggesting that people have a propensity to ignore the best evidence sometimes.
Well, what he does, you got a problem in the Genesis account where you have the earth created on day 1, the sun on day 4. Completely opposite than what science says, that the sun was created like 500 million years or whatever before the earth. So Hugh Ross, as a scientist, knows that's a problem. So what he does is he says, oh, well, the atmosphere was opaque And then on day 4, it became translucent. So he does exegetical gymnastics to reconcile science with the Bible. It's called concordism. So yeah, there's real problems with the older few, but obviously you have problems with the younger few because you have supernova 1987, which we saw in 1987. It took 186,000 light years or years to get here. That's how long it took the light. So that kind of killed the apparent age theory too. So yeah,
Bill, let me take, if I can, Howard, I think makes a really good point though, but let kind of put a different take on it a little bit. Not only I know you have looked at the Bible. I don't think I would argue that you're ignoring the Bible, and you have some compelling things you've seen in the Bible. But this whole idea of trying to examine from a spiritual as well as a physical or scientific viewpoint, have you ever in this process, or maybe in this last year, and this, if it's too personal, let me know. You don't have to answer it in front of everybody. But have you actually tried to make contact with God? And if there's a God, he would definitely be able to hear you and say, God, if you're out there, I'm concerned about this fine tuning. If you are real, would you make yourself known to me? Have you tried like a spiritual approach as well as reading and looking at the science? Have you tried to reach out in prayer or through the Bible?
Not really. I mean, I could take this Kierkegaardian leap of faith. You know what Kierkegaard said, it's like Athens and Jerusalem. You got to pick one or the other. You either got to go by faith and take this leap, or rationality can only get you so far. So I understand that. But I think with all this fine-tuning evidence and origin of life stuff, that you don't have to make a blind leap, that you might get to God through just looking at the science. Now, as far as
I'm not talking so much about a blind leap. So what I'm saying more of the sense of if your shelf, you use the shelf analogy, you've put things up on the shelf, and after a while that shelf is starting to crack. And so maybe tonight you have a bunch of your Christian friends and atheist friends. We're talking you through this, and so maybe there's some of us are attempting to try to shore up the shelf a little bit stronger, and others are trying to add a few more weights on the shelf and make it come down. But the bottom line is, you don't just have to look at the evidence. That's only one wing of the airplane here. And to get off the ground, you might want to not only look at the physical evidence and the scientific evidence, but also look at the spiritual evidence. If there really is a God who really cares about people, and you reached out to him, would God be powerful enough and strong enough? And in fact, if you don't get an answer, that could weigh on the side of, well, maybe there's not a God. I'm not getting any evidence from this angle, but at least to try that and say, I'm going to look scientifically, but I'm also going to try to look spiritually. I'm going to try to read the Bible with an open mind. I'm going to try to pray. And if there's a God, answer. And if there's no God, maybe all you hear is silence.
No, I haven't to any degree, but anyway, let's talk about the Bible. It says the heavens expand like a tent. Now, John Loftus is better equipped to answer this. You know that passage, John, where it says the heavens stretch out?
Yeah. I did a little research on Genesis 1 and some of the other passages. And if that God exists, he was plainly ignorant about the world, the universe, because the earth existed as a watery chaos before he said, let there be light. What we find in the Bible is a God that's abysmally ignorant about life, how it evolved, and what it was before he did anything. What I find him to have been doing there in Genesis 1 is just the same thing as Moses allegedly did with the gods of Pharaoh. In order to get them free from Pharaoh's grip, God sent a plague on each one of their gods' territory, and lo and behold, he extricated them from Egypt. But in Genesis 1, what we have are chaos gods. We actually find Tiamat as one of the chaos gods in Genesis 1, and in Isaiah and in Psalms and in Job, we find there's another chaos god called Rahab, which God fought with in order to do the creating itself. And so the chaos gods in a polytheistic world are the ones who create mischief, where the creative gods come along and they straighten things out. They decide that they're going to cut them in half, and by doing that, they do the creation. And what the people in those days didn't know is that gods lived forever. They treated the gods exactly the way that they treat us as human beings. We die and we are born. We die and we're born. We're dying. So they attribute that same kind of thing to the gods, even Yahweh, and the gods of creation, which one after the other, God is destroying another god's territory. So this is primitive myth that you can believe in God, Bill. Go ahead. That's fine with me. Make it the deity. Make it the deity God. Please make
hey,
it the
John.
deity.
John, what I want to know, did the information that you just give us come from eyewitness testimony?
Eyewitness testimony of the texts.
So you don't know what really happened.
Well, I mean, okay, so if you want to say that you can't know something unless you saw it firsthand, then then you can't know anything. I mean, you were talking about the multiverse could be so many different and diverse things that might not even exist. Well, maybe it doesn't exist. I mean, it didn't have to exist. We couldn't. Nothing might actually turn out as a result. But what we find if we study the Bible, the only conclusion a rational person, I think, personally, I don't mean to offend anyone, the only conclusion that you can come to is, without blinders in your eyes, is that these gods fought each other, and they were claimed by one territory and counterclaimed by another territory. They fought each other in the names of the nations, and this is not something that you can come to any rational conclusion that those gods existed. And if Yahweh didn't exist in the Old Testament, then your God doesn't exist in today's universe either, because what you're doing is you're simply building upon the initial polytheistic gods, and you just won't give it up. No matter what happens, Bill, I want to know: are you going to be circumcised? Is this going to be a circumcision thing?
Let's hope not.
Is it going to be a christening? Is it going to be a bar mitzvah? Is it going to be a baptism? Because
John, you'll be the first to be invited. Okay. Hey, by the way, John, the question is, obviously the Bible has problems. When I was studying Hugh Ross's
I'm going to quote you. The Bible is nuts. Thank you.
Well, no, I mean, when I was in his little group, the plants are created on day 3. Even his own staff said that's way too early. So science does disprove Genesis, but can we give the Bible some credit when it says he stretches out the heavens like a tent, that in the beginning God created, which shows a beginning of the universe, which tends to support the Big Bang. Can we give the Bible any credit for this?
Thanks for asking that. I'm sorry I didn't answer it. But in the heavens, you have God having his throne up into the heavens, where he comes down on a chariot to say hi to people. He sends Satan down to investigate the lives of people, to report back in the heavens that they're either doing good or they're doing bad, and from which the stars are hung in that heavenly expanse. He has a palace up there. So stretching the heavens means he created the heaven. That is the abode of the heavens, and that's where he sends the rain and the flood. Noah, it's said that the floodgates were opened, and it rained down a flood on the earth. So that heaven doesn't exist. It's not held by pillars. These are mythical, ancient structures that we have no credence for. And
so we shouldn't really give the Bible any credit for the science, predicting science and testing.
No, I mean, you might as well give every ancient
Right.
myth some credit by the same regards if they talk about Marduk,
Right.
or others, or like the Greek gods or the Roman gods. They got something right simply because you just happen to get things right from time to time, and that's
Well, I
about
tell
it.
you, John, you have taught me so much. So, and I encourage everybody to read your books and so forth. By the way, Phil, you had a question about things. Phil, Beer.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Phil, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
How's the Calvinator doing? The decalvinator.
Yeah, I really very, very quickly wanted to give a shout out to John Loftus because I think you would enjoy my book called Calvin's Desperation. And it's about John Calvin and Calvinism and determinism. I wish you would read that book because I would enjoy having a discussion with you about it. But Bill, I'm going to try to make this as brief as I possibly can. For years and years, I used to speak for a cultural apologetics organization called Rivendell. And the head of Rivendell was, I think, a friend of James Walker's. Actually, it was Tim Philibosian, and I think Tim has sometimes been a guest, not a guest, but a participant on the book club. And one of the talks that I have given over the years is about computer programming, and I'm grateful to Ron for bringing up the software aspect of DNA. And what I did was I laid out 5 lines of computer code, of software code, source code. And that 5 lines of code was designed to perform a specific task in the computer. And then I pointed out that if one character in that program code was off, was wrong or faulty, then that program code won't run. It has to be written with precision in order to even execute properly. If it's not written with precision, it won't execute, it'll crash. Now, then I asked the audience, what do you think the probabilities are that these 5 lines of code could actually come about by chance? And the audience usually would say zero possibility, basically. And then I moved on to another aspect of this, and that is that what if I wrote some software that was capable of examining that 5 lines of code and then trying to determine whether there was something wrong with that 5 lines of code? And what that would be referred to is self-diagnosis. So what if I wrote some software that was able to diagnose the 5 lines of code that I wrote? How complicated, how much more complex would that software have to be in order to examine that 5 lines of code and determine whether or not there's any kind of error in it? That would be hugely complex. Now, let's say that you took a subroutine or a function that was composed of 5,000 lines of code, and you had some software that was capable of examining 5,000 lines of code and determining whether or not there were any errors in that 5,000 lines of code. The complexity of the software that would be capable of diagnosing 5,000 lines of code would be astronomically complicated.
So what would be the point here?
Well, if the chances are so slim that 5 lines of code could come about by chance, and even slimmer that 5,000 lines of code could come about by chance, it follows that the chances that this software that I would write that could diagnose those 5,000 lines of code are even more astronomically impossible. But now we need to move to another level, and that is that what if I wrote some software that was capable of not only diagnosing the errors in that 5,000 lines of code, or 10,000 or 20,000 or 1,000,000, but was actually able to correct all of the errors in that 5,000 lines of code. So what you're talking about is self-diagnosis and self-repair. And when Ron brought up the DNA and the coding in DNA, we need to understand that that's what DNA does. DNA is not only capable of replicating itself perfectly, it's also capable of diagnosing itself and identifying errors that might actually exist.
Like the genetic regulatory systems, which do seem to indicate a desire. Now, here's my problem, Phil. You do have evidence pointing to God, but you also have things like the endogenous retroviruses, where us and chimps in like 150 locations in our genome have the exact virus, the retrovirus in their thing. So that seems to indicate a common ancestor. So in the bacterial flagellum, it's like, how in the world do you get this, motorboat thing that has to be just so, all these things have to come together at once. You can't do it a step at a time. Now, what the atheists will say is, oh, well, it's a co-opted thing. You can get like a secretary system and then can go and co-opt it and build a flagellum. So yeah, you've got a great point.
A what system?
It's I forgot the name. I just was looking at it. It's something that you have these complex cells and machines and things in the cell, but they could have gone one step at a time. Life could have started with a protocell, not we see life and cells and stuff, and we think, oh my gosh, how in the world did you get to this complexity? That what the evolutionist biologists would say is you can have steps that lead to, like the eye, you can have just a light sensitive bunch of cells that eventually will develop and evolve into what we have now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I think one of the things that we should make sure that we don't miss here is that whenever things are added to these systems in order to make them work better, in order to make them gradually become more complex, and in order to make them gradually become functional, what's being added is information with specificity. And my argument, and well, it's not just my argument, and I agree with people who have made this argument, is that you cannot have an unintelligent, impersonal, mindless, blind, natural world that's going to start inventing information with specificity, and that specificity turns into functionality. That's where the whole thing breaks down. I can see complexity beginning to appear in the natural world by chance, but you can't get complexity with informational specificity by chance. That's
William
where
Pinsky says that you have specified complexity, which infers intelligence.
Right.
And that makes sense. I mean, yeah, there's just so many things that have to go right. And, but we got to be careful not to have the incredulity fallacy where we go, oh my gosh, this just looks so amazing. Do you see what I'm saying? You're familiar with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, my argument, and no one with any seriousness is going to say, I just can't believe that could come about by chance. That's really not the argument.
No,
the argument is, yeah.
And that's why I'm having a little problem. Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate that, Phil.
I mean, I would add that to the fine tuning argument.
Right.
And there's just so many things that it's not just about, oh, I just can't believe that this could all occur by chance. That really isn't the argument. And so if you add all of those things up, I think that may be something that it sounds to me like that is contributing to your crisis of faith.
Oh, absolutely.
And atheism.
I look at James Tour and he goes, oh my gosh, you just have to have, these chemists cheat, these origin of life people. They'll go and get, give me some ribose. Oh, order that. Now, you can't have that on early Earth. They are there. You have an intelligence guiding the chemistry. So these reactions, you have to go and play with them, or they just fall apart sometimes.
Right.
So, but then I look at Professor Dave and he says, oh no, sometimes this can, by autocatalysis, this can go and bring about polypeptides. We've showed it and so forth. It's, Bill, both of these, origin of life and the origin of the universe, I have what's called the layman's dilemma. I don't understand physics. I don't understand biochemistry. I was a history major. So I'm doing the best I can to look at it. And ultimately, you do have to make a choice. I mean, you could just say, look, I just am going to live with the tension. That's kind of like my saying. But I'm the atheist part of the Christian Book Club. Ultimately, if I look at the preponderance of the evidence, I'm going to make a decision one way or the other.
Well, and that's why I would really strongly encourage you, lovingly encourage you, to add another layer to all of this, and that is, if you haven't read it already, read the Epistemological Skyhook.
Oh, sounds great. Maybe we can be at the book club. Have it at the book club.
Well, I think we should have. I think, is it? I can't even remember the author of that book. Is it Haldane? Is it?
Oh, it doesn't matter. We'll find it. Yeah. No,
but
sure.
That would be, because that would echo everything that I said the last time when you talk about my book about the doxastic voluntarism is simply not possible under atheism. And so the Epistemological Skyhook would be an excellent resource for you.
Thank you.
And if we can cover that, I think it'd be great. The problem is that it's rather expensive to pick that book up. It's like $50 on Kindle or the Apple bookstore, something like that. But it is absolutely well worth it, and I think that it is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, defeaters of atheism out there.
Oh,
and
great.
So
well, you're
Bill,
very knowledgeable, and we appreciate your insights. Yeah.
Hey, Bill, I know we've talked about this a lot when we chat on the phone. We've talked about lay people. Your big thing with me, and when we talk, is getting Christians interested in this science, lay people. And we've had a lot of discussions about that. I was just at a church last night talking about Christianity and science, and I think you bring up a good point, because you're wrestling with all these things in the sciences from the popular literature. You and I read the same books, and we talk to the same authors. What do you think, Bill? Why don't you? I would like you to share about kind of our conversations about why lay people should be interested in science and why you think that they're not.
First of all, thank you, Daniel, for coming to our atheist book club and sharing your science. He did a fantastic demonstration on
not
physics.
Our book club, right? Not this book club.
No, the atheist book club.
The atheist book club.
And what's funny is they love Dan. He's made friends with me, has lunch with him, and they hate me. So it's just like, but anyway, Dan, you have made some really good points, and you're probably the biggest cause of this crisis. So
I am.
Oh, of course. You
didn't tell me this. You didn't tell me you're going to spring this one on me.
In your book, what's your book?
Story of the Cosmos.
Story of the Cosmos. It's just, yes, I'm getting more and more evidence that might point to God. And I think, give an example. I went to Colonial Baptist Church. Do you know how long the pastor took to go through Romans?
Like 18
7
months?
years.
Oh my gosh.
It was the standing joke. It's like, okay, you have such good science. Why go? And, we've read Paul for the millionth time. Why don't you guys? And I know here's your challenge is these things are very complex and difficult to understand, but you can get some, notion of the science and how it might point to God.
Well, what I appreciate about you, Bill, because we've known each other since you invited you and James invited me to the book club when we started mostly. But what I like about you, Bill, is you're respectful when we're talking about this stuff. And that's helped me grow as a Christian, because I'm not used to, I mean, I love talking about science, especially cosmology, but as Luke Barnes said in our private video, he's like, yeah, if you're a Christian and you open your mouth about science, people just think you're an idiot. And so I've seen that being the author of this book, but you've helped me to be better at conversing with people who don't agree with me. So thank you for that.
Let me just say, guys, that I do have 2 videos that I want to play. Kelly requested a video from the Cosmic Skeptic that may be able to shed some light on the gravitational constant from an atheist perspective. And then the other one, I do want to play Ken Daniels' a video that he said for you. I'm thinking that it might be better to go. Let me do Ken Daniels first, and then save the Kelly one for later. Let me see. Give me just a second to be able to switch over and show the video. You guys can keep talking while I'm doing that if you want, because this might take.
Anybody want to jump in and say something to Bill? Oh, Bill left. Elvis
Oh,
has left.
real quick, I wanted to tell everybody I put the link for the epistemological skyhook. It's actually by Jim Slagle, so I put the link in there for that if anybody's interested.
James, this is a real problem. You're going to have to rename the forum Christian Book Club.
We need a new atheist co-host.
Exactly.
So we're gonna John, you get the first application if you want to be the new co-host. So,
I'm really a reasonable person. I mean, I don't always seem that way, but I mean, there's when it comes to these discussions, because I think I have a lot to say. I guess everybody does, but I want to say it, and sometimes I do. So that's how it goes.
Well, I think we all have that challenge. Not just you, brother. Let me see if this is going to play for us, and see if I can go full screen. Maybe not. One more time. Okay, this is Kelly, Godless Granny, suggested this video from Cosmic Skeptic, if I've got the right one pulled up, and it's now the video's been sped up, so we have to listen very carefully. He makes some points here. I want everybody to catch him, so listen up real carefully. And he talks about the gravitational constant, and maybe it's not as fine-tuned as we thought. So let's do this. Oh, wrong one. Hang on.
Hey, Bill. Sorry I couldn't make it.
Let me do this one first. This is Ken.
Let
me do this one first.
Me. Haha. I'm not great on my feet, so I hope you'll forgive me for reading what I'm about to say. I was a little surprised to hear about your recent crisis of faith, as you call it, though it wasn't totally out of the blue, since you'd previously been pretty candid about certain problems for naturalism, like the fine-tuning of the universe. I want to commend you for being upfront about your thoughts. It seems most of us on either side rarely express our doubts or misgivings, for fear we'll be seen as a turncoat by the people in our camp. True free thought is the ability not only to think freely, but to say what you're thinking freely, without regard for the social consequences.
We got spaghetti.
Whether what you're going through is a true transition to the other side or a temporary foray into it, the greatest gift we all can offer is the space for you to weigh the evidence for yourself and to come to the conclusion that seems to fit best with the evidence, free from any other considerations like personal or social costs or benefits. Either way you turn, I value your friendship and look forward to many more interactions in the coming years as fate or providence allows. As you know, my journey out of conservative evangelical Christianity to atheist-leaning agnosticism wasn't a straight line. My crisis of faith 24 years ago that led me from my original faith had nothing to do with the existence of a creator God. Nothing at all about the creator God, just the God of the Bible. I found an intellectual home in deism for at least a year because I couldn't fathom how the universe and its laws could have sprung into existence without a supreme agent. To this day, I can't get my mind around it, which is why I consider myself an agnostic rather than an atheist. Sometimes when I consider Luke Barnes's arguments, I find myself wondering again whether maybe there could be a creator after all, even as Christianity itself remains a near impossibility. I don't have to remind you, but I will, of the reasons I doubt the existence of God. You've shared those doubts for most of your life. For me, it boils down to admitting I simply don't know. Yes, I see the challenge of fine-tuning, of the apparent absurdity of an infinite regress, of the intuitive need for a first mover, and of the many improbabilities that had to be overcome for me to be alive and conscious enough to reflect on our origins and to engage in these stimulating conversations that we've had. Then I think about the mystery that if it were for the sake of argument, we were to take temporarily bracket away these origin of life and of the universe and consciousness problems, then lo and behold, from all appearances, we seem to live in a world that's precisely what we would expect if no deity existed, or if a deity existed but were absent. The universe is old and enormous, and the evidence, as even Luke Barnes acknowledges, points to a long natural law-based evolutionary process from the Big Bang to all the life we know, including ourselves and any other life that might exist in the universe. These things all certainly could be true if there is a God, but they could not be true if there wasn't a God. In other words, these things would be required to be true under naturalism, but are merely optional under theism, leaving us to wonder why God would have chosen to set things up in such a way as to mimic precisely what would be required under naturalism, even though he could have done it in myriad of other ways. The truth is that this is not the world most theists imagined it is before modern science discovered these things. Sure, we could come up with post hoc reasons why God might have chosen it to do it this way, to make it look like the world would look as if it were naturalistic. But the most natural fit is naturalism. So this weighs on me every time I'm drawn back to what humanist Paul Kurtz dubbed the transcendental temptation. I think about the adventurous atheists who lived before the time of Darwin and how ludicrous it was for them to wave away the manifest complexities of life, like our eyes and brains and birds' wings. They ventured into their atheism even before having a good solution to life's complexities. Why? Because they observed the world and concluded it's the type of place one would expect if it weren't governed by a deity. And then came Darwin with an explanation, admittedly not of the origin of the first life, but of all the complexities that ensued. Did Darwin answer the mysteries of how the universe got started and why it is the way it is? Certainly not. But he showed that the most complex things we know in the universe ended up having a natural explanation. If that's the case, then couldn't we also be in the same position now with respect to fine-tuning in the origin of the universe, life, and consciousness? I'll be the first to admit I don't have answers to these things, but I reflect long and hard on the way the world is, and I think I'm okay with not knowing. I'd rather confess my ignorance than to fill it with a speculative hole of my own human making, with an agent whose image I'm made in or on whom I've placed human characteristics like a will. I'm not done with my journey. My doubts about God's existence could one day fade away, and I could imagine myself someday following the path you're on. I see majesty in Luke Barnes's vision of a God who set up the billiard balls and took a master shot at the beginning of time, setting up everything to unfold as we see it today. Barnes doesn't even think it was necessary for God to step in to kickstart life or to cause an explosion of body plans in the Cambrian. That to me seems closer to the God of deism than to the God of the Bible, who caused an axe head to float, who caused unfaithful women's thighs to waste away when drinking curse-filled water. He caused sheep to be spotted when spotted sticks were placed near their breeding parents, and he caused diseases to be cured for those who looked at a snake on a pole. I see no majesty in that, like I see potential majesty in the master billiard ball shot caller. In the end, Bill, it's your decision, and I look forward to being a small part of your journey, no matter where you end up. And I'm proud to be your friend. Thanks.
That was good.
Is that amazing? I mean, Ken Daniels, speaking of books that I've read over and over, John Loftus, The Christian Delusion, I've read like 10 times. But Ken Daniels, Why I Believe, he addresses the book of Daniel's problems. He addresses the old earth, young earth thing. He addresses like every major issue. And he is one of the most thoughtful and intelligent people I've ever met. And a very caring, I mean, he gives money to charity. He's faithful to his wife. He's just a tremendous person. And boy, I just really appreciate his thoughts. They were amazing.
Do we have any other questions queued up, or I could go ahead and try to play the other video now?
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Okay, give me just a second to do that.
By the way, I wanted to ask John a quick question. John, do you see YouTube taking over where it's all about subscribers and views rather than books going by the wayside?
Well, yeah, I think that there's a lot of that going on just to get hits, which turn into money. Yeah, I do. I don't know about the polls on that, and it also devalues some scholarship. I think that anybody with a YouTube channel can spout off anything. It's quite a mess out there.
Yeah, but there are some excellent ones. By the way, Kelly's thing is, and I wanted to congratulate her on getting 10,000 subscribers. She's worked very hard and she does just fantastic content. So yeah, you can have some really good.
Yeah.
Well, let me try again now, guys, on this to see. Again, Kelly, Godless Granny, Kelly is sent this to try to help you, Bill, with the some of the fine-tuning argument. One of them is the gravitational constant. And so she pulled this little clip from the Cosmic Skeptic. And again, the audio on it is sped up, so we have to listen real carefully. But he's going to make a case that this constant is not as finely tuned as maybe we would think, that there may be other explanations, necessary explanations that don't require a random number. So let's go ahead and watch this video now.
Help me, Kelly.
All the arguments posed by defenders of the God hypothesis in recent years, it seems for some reason that the one that holds the most resonant persuasive power over atheists is the so-called fine-tuning argument, a type of teleological argument that's often quoted as being the best argument that exists in favor of God, regarding cosmology and the universal conditions which govern the physics of all matter. So then, the argument goes as follows. There exist a number of physical constants that govern the universe, such as the rate of its expansion or the strength of gravity, that if altered by even an inconceivably small amount, would mean that the universe would cease to exist. As an example, if the expansion rate of the universe were any faster, the universe would have initially flown apart so quickly as to disallow for the assembly of subatomic particles, and later atoms, and even later, you and me. If, conversely, it were any slower, then the universe would have collapsed under its own gravity. Alas, the expansion rate is in fact precisely the speed it needs to be to allow for the development of matter. Now, the instinctual reaction to this is generally the consideration of two possible explanations. Option A is that this occurred completely by chance and that we just got lucky. And option B is that there was some kind of intelligence behind the calibration of these constants. Now, admittedly, it does at first seem rather obvious that the proposition of chance is palpably absurd. However, it may console you to realize that this unlikelihood is comfortably recognized by most educated disbelievers and that the options presented here in fact constitute a false dichotomy. That is to say, there are other explanations for the apparent fine-tuning. The third, often unspoken option to consider is that of physical necessity. In other words, we have to consider the possibility that there are some as of yet unidentified laws and universal properties which create a physical impossibility for the constants of the universe to vary from those which allow for its sustainment. The constants must have been that way, in other words. To elucidate, allow me to present a wonderfully convenient example, given that this has already been somewhat shown to be the case for at least one of the quoted constants. The specific example I'm speaking of is gravity. As you'll know if you paid even minimal attention in school, it was Sir Isaac Newton who first proposed gravity as an explanation for the orbit of celestial orbs in a publication called Principia Mathematica in the 17th century. For Newton, gravity was more of a concept than a physical quality of the universe, which he explained with reference to a mathematical inverse square law, which is simply an elegant formula that describes the strength of gravity. If an object moves 2 times further away, its gravity becomes 4 times weaker. If an object moves 4 times further away, its gravity becomes 16 times weaker because it's squared. Under a Newtonian understanding of gravity, it can be remarkably easy to credit some intelligent designer for the mathematical perfection of this expression. However, 2 centuries later, gravitational theory experienced quite a shake-up. When Albert Einstein published his understanding of gravity, and thanks to since collected evidence, the world was made aware of a fascinating fact. That gravity isn't just an arbitrary force, it's a physical quality of the universe. You see, Einstein's big idea was contrary to the belief that the universe is just empty space in which stuff happens, that space itself is a physical thing, a thing that can bend and warp and be affected by matter. The common analogy is to think of the universe as some kind of 4-dimensional fabric. Similarly to how placing a bowling ball on a trampoline will cause other objects on the trampoline to fall towards it, objects in space warp the space around them, causing them to attract other objects, the effect that we call gravity. Suddenly, the mathematical perfection of gravity makes perfect sense. Of course, the force of gravity is a perfect inverse square law. It has to be due to the fact that gravity is just a symptom of the malleable fabric of space. It's not just an arbitrary value that could have in principle had any strength. It's a real, tangible, physical effect of space itself. And hey presto, the problem of fine-tuning disappears. And so it may be a long while before we can develop a similar understanding of the other governing constants of the universe. But remember that just because we don't have proof of the physical necessity of other constants, its mere plausibility at the very least removes the need for the conjuring up of some god or gods as an alternative explanation. You can't possibly claim that each of these possibilities had the same chance of occurring, because that would require a knowledge of potential outcomes which you and I simply do not have. In other words, it requires a significant assumption for one to be able to assert, as apologists so often do, that the chances of our universe existing are tiny.
Wow.
Well, the first thing he does right at the end there is this happens a lot in this argument, where you confuse a frequentist probability idea with a Bayesian probability idea. Bayesian brings in priors, what we have from experience, and we give value to these priors. The frequentist, and what Alex was arguing there, the frequentist is like dice rolling, where we have something that we can do over and over and over again. So one of the common objections from skeptics in terms of the fine-tuning is that we don't have other universes to test and to play out and to see what might happen. So, but it's a misapplication of probabilistic arguments. And fine-tuning, as Luke will tell you in a heartbeat, fine-tuning is Bayesian. It is not frequentist. And a lot of people don't understand that distinction. Even I'm fuzzy with it. But he just made that classic blunder there. Luke even told that to Sabina Hassenfelder when they debated on Unbelievable. So you have to distinguish between the frequentist and the Bayesian. The other issue that he makes is I don't understand how understanding space-time fabric does away with the gravitational constant. The fabric, whatever that might be, still has to be, fire retardant. It has to be just the right kind of stretchiness. You want to call it stretchy. There's still dimensionality to that has to be precisely balanced in order to carry the planets like that. So I'm not clear as to how that argument would do away with God, or the fine-tuning anyway. You'd still have to explain.
Bill, first of all, were you able to hear that? I know it was
Yes. Yeah.
set
No,
up. Did it connect, make sense? Do you understand his argument?
I'm done with looking toward God. That's answered all my questions. Yeah. Thank you, Kelly.
Silver bullet
I'm back.
But Bill, I have to ask you a question. I have to ask this question.
Sure.
Has that cat you're holding ever disappeared and then reappeared?
No.
Okay, I was just curious. I know your last name's not Schroeder, but I was just.
Well, I got to listen to it twice because I set up the video to be able to play it tonight, so I had some more time to think about it. And there's just two issues to me. One is maybe cosmetic, hopefully just a cosmetic issue. The other is a more substantive issue. The demonstration itself, I think it kind of begs the question, because you have the fabric of the trampoline with the weight of the bowling ball, and you see how it makes these nice orbits and stuff like that. But the demonstration itself is flawed, because for that demonstration to work, you have to have gravity. In other words, the gravity is causing the bowling ball to sink down into the fabric, and a finely tuned gravitational constant is causing all this. And if you tried that same experiment on the International Space Station, it wouldn't work at all. So
he had to get the right stretchy fabric,
Yeah, it could just be an issue with the demonstration is flawed. Maybe the concept is valid, but just the demonstration is flawed. But to me, that Daniel kind of touched on this as well. It seems to me that all you're doing is exchanging one highly improbable gravitational constant for another set of finely tuned constants that must be just right. If you do have the fabric of space represented by the trampoline, it has to be finely tuned. It can't be tissue paper. That's not going to work. It can't be concrete. That won't work. So you still have a set of parameters that have to be finely tuned, or you don't get the effects of gravity. And so to me, it's a nonsensical demonstration, and you're just
moves it back a step.
It's kind of like the multiverse. Even if we grant a multiverse, you still would seem to have some kind of finely tuned multiverse generating machine making this happen.
So let's ask Kelly. Kelly, does that answer the question to you?
I don't really know. For one thing, I don't know anything about Bayesian probabilities. I would have to read up on that to understand that argument. But what I'm seeing him say is we don't know if anything could be different. And I don't think that the response that James has given us really addresses that. He's saying, well, if it was different, then we still need the fine tuning in order to be the way it is. But could it be different? And that was Cosmic Skeptics' entire argument was, we don't know that it could.
So
We don't know that it's impossible.
space fabric has to be those parameters, that amount of stretchiness, that ability to support things throughout the universe, that malleability, all these things are by necessity exactly the way they are.
Right. It could just be necessity.
Yeah, brute fact is what we.
Right, exactly. And you know,
And it is, yeah.
and I think you did get it right on one point, James, is you said it's just moving it a step back. But you know, if you choose to say that a God fine-tuned the universe to make it that way, then you're assuming God is a brute fact. Either way, you're coming down to a brute fact.
Well, I would say that what we're saying is it's either accidental design or intelligent design. And so whether you call it God or not, or whether you try to put it off on aliens or something like that, it's still
necessity
requires a great deal of intelligence to come up with something that's going to work on all these different levels.
And necessity doesn't have any causal power. It's an abstract concept like mathematics.
Well,
it just
same with God.
Well, no, God is a personal agent who causes things, Kelly.
Well, yeah.
Necessity is an abstraction that can't do anything. You could put 7 + 2 on a chalkboard. It's not going to make your dinner. It's abstract. It explains things, but it doesn't have any power to do anything. So necessity falls flat. It's powerless. It's like a speeding limit sign. It's there, but it can't make you slow down. So it's descriptive, but it has no power to do anything.
Right. But you use necessity to get the existence of God.
Well, no, I mean, he's a necessary being, but he's an active being that has causal power. Necessity by itself is an abstraction that has no causal power.
Part of the definition, you're right, Kelly, that part of the definition of God, at least from a Jewish, Christian, and to some degree Islamic perspective, is we're defining God. And these are ancient goat herders defining God this way as being outside of time space, of being a necessary being. All these are part of the description. Now, you can describe that, but it doesn't mean it's true. So we can set up that definition. The Greek and Roman gods are something different. These are contingent beings. They're not necessary beings. There was a time they were not, that the universe existed before Hercules or Aphrodite existed. But the Christian and Muslim and Jewish concept of God is defined. We're defining God in that parameter. So what we're saying is the universe that we see seems to be the most logical explanation for it is a being like that. Maybe it is the Muslim God Allah, but some kind of being like that would have to would be necessary to explain everything that we see right now. Or you have to say there's some kind of brute fact that creates all these things. Again, I think it's the most logical conclusion is that there's some kind of personal, very powerful being that is a necessary being outside of time and space, timeless, would explain all the phenomena we're seeing right now. And so you just have this one simple thing that explains everything.
I don't think that the universe as a brute fact requires it to have been designed. It's not that there's that a brute fact designed it. I think the brute fact is simply that it is.
Well, again, that was for most of the history back to the Greeks, Aristotle, etc. This idea was that the kind of the steady state model that the universe has always existed. It's a given. We don't need to explain it because it's always been here. We just have to explain everything else. But then most cosmologists today, including atheist cosmologists, say that the universe absolutely had a beginning. And anything that begins to exist must have a cause. And so it's what's the cause of the universe? There's no matter, energy, space, or time. They're all interconnected. So whatever created it has to be not involve time or space.
Keep assuming it was created.
Well, okay, well, it didn't exist and then it did exist.
Can I jump in here for
Well,
just
hold
a
on, Phil.
second?
Hold on, Phil. Scott's been waiting. He's got a question.
Oh, yeah,
Scott, you wanna
Scott's on
jump in
his
real
hand,
quick?
and I apologize, Scott. I know your hand's been up for quite a while. Scott, you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you. It's good to see everyone. I haven't been around for a long time. Hi, James. Hi, Daniel. And hi, Bill. Jody told me that this was happening, and I said, well, I have to go see that because Bill is my favorite atheist. I've said that. Jody can verify because you're friendly, Bill. You have an open mind, and you're willing to look at the arguments on both sides and even argue them. So the question I wanted to ask you, though, is about what is your current atheistic worldview that you're having doubts about? Because as James just said, we have an explanation in God that I found compelling because it explains all these things we're talking about, the creation, the existence of the universe, the low entropy state of things at the beginning, the programming in life, morality, beauty, where can all these things come from? God can explain all these questions that you're having. What is the atheist worldview that you currently embrace or think is a good alternative that has the same explanatory scope and power? That's my question.
Well, that's a marvelous question. I've asked the question, why did God make so many stars? I mean, trillions of galaxies, trillions of stars. What's the point? My worldview is confusion, doubt, and uncertainty right now. So, and like I said, I just have really been wrestling with this book and the indication that the universe might have foresaw that we were coming, that it might be prepared for human life. So all those are great questions. And as far as my own personal life, if I believed in God or whatever, boy, would he have an impact on my life? Because as an atheist, it's kind of tough being an atheist because you've got to go and think, oh, I don't have a God to rely on. I've got to make this decision, this moral decision, this ethical, what, and it's tough, me being a biased, being, the evolutionary argument against naturalism, like if I just evolved by happenstance and just randomness, how can I rely on my own cognition, my own thoughts, my own judgments, which I know are flawed? I've got huge biases and I'm in a Christian culture, so I have that bias. And how did I become an atheist? Well, did I read a Hitchens book? Did I watch a Bart Ehrman video? I mean, a lot of this stuff wasn't just well planned out. It was kind of random. So I don't know.
Okay. That's honest. I appreciate that. That's why I said you're my favorite atheist.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed you being on your program, by the way. And talk about your channel, by the way.
Yeah, we have a Christian ministry, Jody and I. It's the Disciples of Yahweh in Christ. And by the way, when you guys were talking about all this science and scientific method, I have a video on our channel called The Scientific Method in the Bible, revealed 2,000 years before Bacon. So God gave us the scientific method before we even discovered it. You might want to check that one out. Anyway, I just wanted to quickly say that for me, I had grown up as agnostic/atheist. And what brought me around, I had never looked at anything religious, didn't care. When I finally did learn about Christianity, I saw that this was the explanation for all of this reality in myself, my own brokenness, why I couldn't do better, why I couldn't be a better person. It had the greatest explanatory scope and power among all the possible worldviews. And I did investigate other religions thinking, hey, just because this one, maybe there's others. And I looked at other alternative explanations, and I've never heard a good atheistic explanation that has that scope and power. Last question, though, for you, Bill. If there is a God and you should show up on Judgment Day before the seat of judgment, it seems to me you can't hardly use Russell's argument, not enough evidence, because here you are telling us all about it, and you've been on this show. You're a founder of this channel. So
every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord, right?
Well,
so yes. I don't have any option here, do I?
I'm asking you, what are you going to say? How are you going to feel?
Do I get credit for any of this stuff?
Okay, that's a good response.
That's about all I can come up with.
Oh, well, I think you know the gospel message says we don't get
Yeah.
credit for our works. So yeah, it's all in faith in Jesus. Thank you. Thank you for taking the
Thanks
question.
for tuning in.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for
Bill,
that
go ahead.
question and comment. Did somebody else had their hand up just a second ago? Who was that?
Joel did.
Joel, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm not sure it'll be a coherent one though, but I'll try.
Well, that doesn't stop the rest of us.
Never stop me.
Couldn't say anything worse than I've said already.
Fair enough. Okay, so Ken Daniels' video from earlier really resonated with me because I went through a similar deconstruction, deconversion phase, whatever you want to call it, where I actually became a deist for a period of time before I just became comfortable with, agnostic, pessimist, atheist, all those Latin A in front of, that whole phase, where I just say, you know what, I don't know, and I'm okay with that. I don't believe, and I'm okay with that until I have a good reason to believe. The reason why that's the coherent part or the relevant part. This part might be out of scope, and if so, moderators feel free to tell me to mute myself. Because I recognize that this is the Atheist and Christian book club, but I feel it's important to say that it shouldn't just be taken for granted that okay, how do I phrase this? I'm Indian. I don't know if any of you can tell. I know I don't hop on camera, but from my picture, if you can tell, I'm Indian. I grew up in India, and I was surrounded by a completely different culture. My family is Christian, which is why I ended up going to church. And even after deconversion, I still show up in places like this, because I find the discussions interesting. But the whole half of my life, the whole chunk of my life was in a completely different culture. I was surrounded by Hindu friends and even Muslim friends. And so to me, it just seems like my common sense where I would gravitate towards if at some point in the future I end up where Bill is at and I have some doubts. I wouldn't call it a crisis of faith, but seeking answers, however I would end up phrasing it. This is why I said like it might not be coherent how I'm trying to.
No, it's very coherent. And let me tell you, what you're talking about, our own John Loftus here has called the outsider test of faith, which is what determines your faith is where you're born, peer group, and your parents. He's actually written a whole book on that, which you might want to read, but you're absolutely right. We don't realize how much culture impacts our beliefs. And we're actually swimming in a Christian culture, and it's very difficult. Now, people like James Walker have broken out of their culture and faith. He was a Mormon. Right. So it's possible, but very difficult.
Yeah, I'm just listening to this, and this is not meant to be denigrating or by any means, but I'm swimming in this conversation of all these opinions of people saying, oh, it has all this explanatory power, just dive into the Bible and dive into, and even you yourself, Bill, earlier you were saying like, oh, we have to at least acknowledge this part of the Bible where it says the heavens, I forget the exact scripture,
stretch out like a tent or whatever, implying that it predicted the Big Bang with the expansion of space. Yeah.
At that exact moment that you were sharing that opinion, my mind went to the Kali Yugi. I don't know if you're familiar with the Yugi. Okay, in Hinduism, they have something called yugis, which are it basically translates to world cycle. And currently, we're in the Kali Yugi. And the reason my mind went to that was because at a certain point in my life, I went straight from deism to atheism, just to be clear. But I remember contemplating that. I was thinking, this time period makes a lot more sense than the biblical time periods, because according to Hinduism, the Kali Yuga started 5,125 years ago, I want to say, and it hasn't ended. The end of the period will be 485,000. They have an oddly specific number, but I just remembered thinking at a certain point in my life, like, these time periods are much closer to the the 13.7 billion years of the universe. It's still not accurate.
Right.
But and the Kali Yuga, by the way, is the shortest time frame. So, and they have 3 more of these. So yeah, that's the cultural like impact, I guess.
Well, we
I
see
just
through culture, we have no idea how much culture impacts our thoughts and our perspective and whatever. And when I became a Christian at 17, I didn't have you guys witnessing. I didn't have any Muslims coming to my school, but I did have, Youth for Christ or whatever it's called, go. And so that was the only game in town. So my culture was very, limiting.
Joel,
Joel, was your cultural experience, or are you saying that helped you arrive at where you are right now, or was it an impediment? Did it make it harder for you to come to your, and you would define yourself now as atheist or agnostic, right?
Yeah, no, just to be clear, I went from Christian to I don't know, just questioning. I consider my current atheism, whether this is, I don't know if you'll hear this as a joke or not, but I mean this in all sincerity. This is a part of my faith journey, or this is, I don't want to call it the end destination, but this is where I currently ended up. Like I was seeking, I went on a faith journey, and I just ended up here. But yeah, I went from Christian to a doubting Christian to a deist for, I want to say, maybe 2 years, or a very short span of time, a very brief period of time, and then yeah, agnostic, atheist,
Well,
whatever
that's
Did
label.
your culture help you to navigate that journey, or was it an impediment?
No, the point I was making there is, while I was questioning, I was gravitating towards this Hinduism and Buddhism, specifically Zen Buddhism. But yeah, like, just what was common sense to me, what made sense, all of these arguments that I've been hearing from others, like, oh, it has so much explanatory power, or it just makes sense. And even in the comments, some people were saying, like, I'm reading this, I had similar feelings, but my common sense, my true north, my compass kind of pointed me in a completely different direction from everyone else here. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that, and I guess tying this back so it's not completely incoherent back into scope. If you
No, it's been
find
very
fingerprint of,
insightful.
I'm sorry?
Thank you. It's been very insightful. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, if you find the fingerprint of God, if you find the pen stroke of God, whatever you want to call it, right? This inexplicable number, this inexplicable proton, electron, balancing act. Um, I would say that the onus is on Christianity or Hinduism or whoever to say, oh, this is actually when Brahma danced the universe into being. This is actually when, Yahweh, molded the universe like clay, or whatever their argument is. Until then, the default position, the natural, just say I don't know, or this is interesting, this is an
Believe
unanswered
me, my
question.
saying is live with the tension. So I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
But let me just say,
I think you're right, Joel, in the sense that I've noticed in the 6 years of doing the club, and Bill will concur on this. It's interesting how both sides, and it is, we have had others in, but it's almost all Christian and atheist, and that's why we call it that. It's 99% Christian and atheist. But both sides will often appeal to the exact same evidence, and then they'll cite the evidence, and then they see that supports my position. And then the other side will go, no, that was my argument to support my position, but we're all looking at the same evidence. And I compare it to like a puzzle piece. If you're taking a piece of a puzzle and it's blue with some white, and half the room says it's clouds, that's the blue sky and the white cloud. The other half of the room looks at the same puzzle piece and they say, no, it's the ocean, and that's water, and that's the water is blue, and the wave is white. And so but it's the same puzzle piece. And so the worldview, of course, is the picture that's on the cover of your box when you get the cover. When you get the puzzle, you see the box, and that kind of frames all the evidence for you. And so this is a bias that Bill was talking about, that the best we can do is acknowledge it and try to compensate for it. But there's really no solution. The culture that we're in and our current worldview is going to affect the hermeneutic, how we interpret all the evidence is going to be based on that. And so we try to overcome it, we try to acknowledge it, but we will never be completely
I tell you, James, a zebra might as well change his stripes than to escape culture. It's very difficult. And you have, and I admire that. But here's another thing is the church has got to wake up and address these questions, because every YouTube kid, 20-year-old kid, can now get a channel. And you have these sites like Harmonic Atheist, where everybody is telling their deconstruction story. Everybody has a voice now. And Kelly's interviewed a lot of people that are going through their deconstruction. So the church has got to stop, hiding and acknowledge that this is a real problem.
Let me do this real quickly, as we're about out of time. I do want to talk about next month's book. We are going to be talking to Phil Zuckerman. Phil Zuckerman is a professor of secular studies, and he is the author of the book Faith No More: Why People Reject Religion. He's full professor at Fitzler College in Claremont, California. He teaches, I love some of these classes: classical sociological theory, sociology of secularism, secularism global and local, sociology of religion and secularism, skepticism. He teaches a course on that, and a course on irreligion. So that's some of the courses. That's going to be our book. Watch the book club, atheistchristianbookclub.com, for more information on that. And sorry to butt in, but we were almost out of time, and I wanted to do that. So any last questions before we go?
Jody had one, James.
Okay. Could you unmute?
Yeah, I've unmuted. Me and Bill's been friends for many years, not quite as long as you and James has been friends, but I'd like to ask my dear friend Bill, what would be holding you back right now from becoming a Christian? What more evidence do you actually need? And maybe you can even come on our YouTube channel, and we'd like to have you on our YouTube channel again as well. But yeah, Bill, what's holding you back right now? What evidence do you need?
Well, speaking of Christianity specifically, Kelly had a great interview with Dr. Blevins of Watchman Fellowship, which addressed the Jerusalem-Galilee conflict. Did he appear in Jerusalem first or Galilee first? And this isn't just a tangential thing. This goes to the heart of the gospel. How can we believe that Jesus was really resurrected? In Galilee, he's the resurrected second person of the Trinity, is appearing to the disciples. And what does it say? Some doubted. Well, if you have the resurrected Jesus in front of you and you're doubting, what do you expect me to do? So yes, there's problem after problem with Christianity in the Bible and so forth. But why right now, Jody, I haven't even talked to you about this. I'm just kind of in a crisis. I'm trying to sort things out and doing the best I can.
Well, I've been praying for you for years. I'm going to keep it up if you don't mind. All right. Thank you, Bill.
All right. Thank you.
Bill, was this helpful at all for
Absolutely. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And thank you, James, for being fair and balanced and letting the atheists like Kelly and John Loftus and Ken express their concerns and their viewpoint, because, they're the ones that I really have a lot of admiration for. And I think they're just done a fantastic job with what they do.
Well, I would just add, and we've talked privately about this, but just from a very practical level, I don't think that in order to embrace the gospel of Jesus Christ, you have to have overwhelming evidence. I don't think you have to be 99.999% sure. I don't think you need to be 51% sure. On a very practical level, if atheism is true, you get the same thing. You die and you cease to exist. If Christianity is even possibly true, if it's 1 out of 100% true, if it's 2% true, if there's any chance at all, this is your chance. And so I would say, rather than trying to say, I'm not going to have faith until every possible question, every every apparent contradiction in the Bible is resolved to my satisfaction, that I'm just needing enough evidence to say it might be true. And to me, that's enough to fully embrace it. I think there's more evidence than that, but I don't think we need to have all that evidence when the only other option is a godless eternity. Either way, if there's no God, I'm in the same boat as you. But if there is a God, we are going in two completely different paths.
Well, you know what Anselm said? You don't understand that you may believe. You believe so that you may understand. Faith seeking understanding, right?
I love it. Yeah, that's very good.
So I am aware of
Why
that.
didn't I quote that? Thanks so much, everyone, especially the new people. I don't know how many new ones, a lot of new faces here, a lot of names I've seen scrolling by that I didn't recognize. Thank you for being part of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. I hope you can join us next month. That's going to be on, do we have the date on that? Yeah, here it is. November 7th, Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time. And until that next meeting, you guys have a great October, and we'll see you next time.